Have you ever wondered why your life seems to go in circles? You try to change, you put in the effort, you start over. But something invisible pulls you back. Maybe the problem isn't what you're doing, but what's acting within you without you realizing it. This video is for those who feel like they're fighting against themselves. For those who've tried everything except understanding what's really sabotaging their own steps. Today, you'll discover why your life isn't changing and what's behind it all. There's a hidden, repetitive, and silent cycle that traps you without you noticing. But understanding this cycle is the first step to breaking it and truly creating the reality you deserve. Self-sabotage, contrary to what many people think, doesn't begin with action. It sneaks in quietly, days or even years before, deep in places we barely remember anymore. It's like there's a mental stage where an old and poorly rehearsed play repeats on loop, always with the same ending: frustration. Jung called this an autonomous complex, an emotional core that acts as if it has its own will, and we obey without even realizing it. It's not that a person decides to sabotage themselves, they're just repeating a script they don't even know they're acting out. Imagine someone who constantly abandons projects halfway through. It might seem like laziness, but often it's fear of reliving the judgment they suffered way back when they tried and were ridiculed. The body remembers, even when the mind pretends to forget. And so, to avoid feeling that same pain again, they create an escape pattern. The curious thing is that the more this happens, the stronger the cycle becomes. As if the unconscious is saying, "You already know the ending, so don't even start." The script repeats with different scenarios, but the emotion is always the same. And that's where the danger lies. The person thinks they're making free decisions, but what's actually in the driver's seat is a fragment of unprocessed past. How do you break this if you don't even know you're trapped? That's the starting point, understanding that the self-sabotage cycle isn't born in the present. It's a sophisticated repetition of what remained unresolved back then. And the most curious thing is that often, whoever holds the strings of this puppet is wearing a mask they've learned to wear so well that they no longer realize it isn't real. From early on, we learn that we can't show everything we feel. We swallow tears here, put on a smile there, adjust our tone of voice so as not to bother others too much. Gradually, this social character takes shape. Jung called this the persona. It's useful, of course. It helps us live in groups, survive in difficult environments. But there comes a point where the mask sticks to the face. The person forgets it was just a role and begins to live as if that were all they are. Then, any attempt at change feels like betrayal. This is where self-sabotage gains another layer, the fear of abandoning the image that others already recognize. Those who live as the strong one don't feel they have permission to falter. Those who have always been the good kid panic at the idea of making mistakes. And the worst part? The whole world might applaud the mask. But it might be suffocating the person wearing it. It's like wearing a tight suit just because someone said it looks good. Eventually, the body starts to scream, and in that scream emerge disguised sabotages looking like fatigue, indecision, lack of time. Behind procrastination often lies the fear of not meeting the expectation that the persona has built. After all, if I try something new and fail, maybe they'll realize I'm not so good after all. So, better not to try. It's the theater of life turning into prison. And the more the actor believes in the role, the further they get from their own essence. But what if behind that mask there's a deeper voice, a part that has grown tired of pretending and has started to whisper, even if you're not hearing it clearly yet? You know that inner voice that says, "Better not. This isn't for you," or "It's going to go wrong." Well, it rarely shouts, but it's always whispering. And the most curious thing is that, in many cases, it isn't even really yours. It's an old recording coming from situations you lived through and couldn't process. Jung called this the shadow, not in the sense of something evil or diabolical, but as everything that was pushed into the basement of consciousness. Fears, anger, rejected traits, everything you had to hide to be accepted. And the problem is that what we hide doesn't disappear. It only gains strength. And when the shadow finds a crack, it infiltrates decisions, impulses, and giving up. It's sabotage that looks like protection, like when someone avoids exposure for fear of being judged, but deep down, what they fear is reliving the shame of when they were humiliated in the past. It's not laziness. It's not lack of will. It's the shadow trying to protect you with the same methods it used when you had no choice. It works between the lines. A comment that discourages, a habit that sabotages, a choice that repeats the same pattern. And the cruelest part? It's subtle. It makes it seem like it's you who's making the decision, when in reality, it's a wounded self, hidden, wanting to keep you safe, even if it costs you your evolution. But the more you pretend this voice doesn't exist, the stronger it becomes. And then comes the inevitable question: what is this part trying to protect with so much fear? Nobody wakes up and thinks, today, I'm going to sabotage myself. Self-sabotage isn't stupidity nor unwillingness. It's emotional intelligence trying to survive with the tools it learned in the past. Behind each block, there's a wounded part that created a form of protection. It's like that fear of public speaking that started with a nasty joke in childhood. The pain was forgotten, but the strategy of staying quiet remained, because it worked, even if just for a while. What seemed like limitation was actually a defense mechanism, and that changes everything. Instead of fighting against their own blocks, the person begins to talk with them. It's as if they were saying, okay, I understand what you're trying to do for me. This listening movement transforms everything. A good exercise here is to write a letter to your sabotaging part. It might seem silly, but believe me, when you give voice to what was once just automatic impulse, you begin to create space for choice. And you know what's most interesting? This part that sabotages doesn't want to be an enemy. It wants to be seen. It wants to be heard. It carries stories that nobody ever had the patience to listen to. And when you begin to welcome this voice, it stops shouting. The limitation loses its leading role, and the protagonist of your life becomes you again. But this only happens when the person accepts to look inside and, without judgment, understand what is still calling for help behind the resistance. There exists a force within each person that keeps calling, even when they try to ignore it. Jung called this the self, the totality that wants to emerge, and often the internal conflict we feel isn't a sign of weakness, but of growth. It's the tension between what we already know and master and what we have not yet become, but is there, knocking at the door. Self-sabotage at this point is a disguised request, a twisted way of saying there's something new wanting to be born here. It's common for a person to feel as if they were divided between two voices. One wants to evolve, the other wants to survive, as it always has. The self pulls toward transformation. The persona, the ego, and the shadow try to keep everything as it was, because that's safer. And that's where chaos enters, because living in this division consumes immense energy. It seems that the more the person tries to change, the more they sabotage themselves. But the problem isn't lack of effort. It's the lack of listening to what's behind this struggle. When the self begins to emerge, it messes up everything that was boxed up. Old dreams return, interests change, friendships lose their meaning. And that's scary, of course, but it also liberates. Recognizing this call is the first step to stop feeling torn. Conflict becomes a bridge, resistance becomes a compass. And little by little, the person begins to realize they're not breaking, they're being rebuilt. But for that, they'll have to start listening to the signals coming from the soul, and they never appear by chance. There are things that the waking mind doesn't understand, but dreams reveal without shame. It's in the silence of the early morning that the unconscious whispers truths we try to silence during the day, recurring dreams, strange symbols, even those absurd coincidences that seem like movie scripts. None of this is by chance. When the soul wants to speak, it finds a way. And when the person begins to notice these signs, a new level of understanding opens up, as if life gained subtitles. A simple example: someone repeatedly dreams they're running late. It might seem silly, but behind this could be a repressed urgency, a decision not being made, a change being postponed. Or that chance meeting with an old friend on the exact day you thought about moving to a new city. The unconscious expresses itself through symbols, metaphors, and synchronicities. It's not magic, it's deep language. And learning to interpret it is like having an internal GPS pointing to where the soul wants to go. To start, just keep a small notebook by the bed. Write down everything you remember upon waking, even if it seems meaningless. Gradually, patterns begin to emerge. You can also use symbolic cards like tarot or Jung's archetypes, do guided meditations, or simply pay attention to the coincidences in life. These messages don't shout, they whisper. And when they're heard, something inside us begins to align. But listening isn't always easy, especially when there's an internal conflict between what we want and what we repeat. There's a silent abyss between I want and I do. And this gap is often inhabited by old versions of ourselves who continue making decisions on autopilot. The person wants to change a habit, wants to start something new, wants to break a pattern, but before they know it, they've already pressed replay on the same old attitude. This doesn't happen due to lack of willpower, but because the autopilot is still in the hands of the unconscious. And as Jung said, as long as this isn't recognized, we call it fate. It's as if there were two characters in the same story, the dreamer and the doer. One imagines the new life, visualizes, plans. The other, when the moment comes, freezes. This conflict is common in those who try to change without first understanding who's in command, and more importantly, what this command is trying to protect. Often the fear of failing, of not being accepted, or of being disappointed again is there, subtle, sabotaging action with very well-crafted excuses. A practical exercise is to write, what do I want to do? And right below, what do I actually do? Then explore without judgment what exists between these two answers. You can use this investigation as a daily ritual, and even talk to these internal parts as if they were characters in your own story. This dialogue opens space for something new to emerge, and it's exactly there, at that point of tension between desire and repetition, that an important key begins to turn. But this key only fits when the person learns to look at the cause, and not just the symptom. Many people try to overcome self-sabotage with brute force, as if they were at war with it. But the truth is that fighting against yourself only generates more resistance. What repeats isn't there by chance. It's asking for attention. When a person insists on forcing themselves to change without understanding what that sabotage is signaling, they're just covering the hole with sand. It might seem like it worked for a while, but as soon as there's a crisis, an emotional trigger, the old pattern returns as if it had never left. Healing self-sabotage is more like opening an internal dialogue than waging a battle. It's asking, what are you trying to protect me from feeling? Or what are you trying to show me with this behavior? This listening posture generates a type of transformation that doesn't need so much force, because instead of pushing, you embrace. And when this part feels heard, it reorganizes itself. It's like a tense muscle that, when massaged, relaxes on its own. No real healing comes from ignoring pain, but from touching it with courage and presence. Many people avoid this listening because they think they'll find something horrible inside. But most of the time, what lives behind the sabotage is just a piece of the story that was never supported. It could be an old memory, an inherited belief, a traumatic experience that froze in time. Integrating this part doesn't mean agreeing with it. It means giving it back its rightful place within yourself. And little by little, what was once a symptom begins to dissolve because the root has been recognized. And it's in this recognition that a new type of action begins, lighter and freer. Big changes don't start with grand promises, but with small rituals that seem almost insignificant until they're not. The unconscious mind doesn't understand the language of willpower, but responds very well to symbolic repetition. Writing a journal of saboteurs, for example, is a direct way to bring the shadow out of the dark. When you name what sabotages your steps, you begin to take away its power to act in silence. You can write phrases like, "Today, my saboteur said, I'm not capable, but I responded differently." Another powerful practice is creating micro-habits that deliberately contradict the voice of sabotage. If the inner voice says, "You never finish anything," choose a small, daily task just to be completed, even if it's something simple, like washing the dishes immediately after lunch. The idea here isn't the task itself, but the message it sends to the unconscious, "I am someone who finishes." This gradually cements a new internal narrative, organically, without forcing an identity that hasn't yet been integrated. Active imagination, a Jungian technique, can also be used as an internal ritual of reprogramming. You can sit, close your eyes, and talk to the part of yourself that usually sabotages. Ask what it wants. Let it speak, even if only in thought. Other practices, such as guided meditations for shadow integration or visualizations of possible futures, help dissolve the old cycle and build a new one. These are subtle but consistent actions that make way for real change. And when the path begins to clear, a new inner strength also awakens. There's a part of you that already knows the way, and it's not in the future, it's acting now. Jung called this the self, the totality of your psyche, including everything you were, are, and are becoming. This future that calls you isn't just desire or fantasy. It's a living structure, a nucleus that pulses within you, trying to fulfill itself. When you stop repeating the same sabotaging patterns, you begin to hear this call more clearly. It's like tuning into a frequency that was always there, but was previously drowned out by the noise of repetition. And this frequency doesn't shout, it whispers. It appears in intuitions, unexpected encounters, in the feeling of, "It's this way." The self guides but doesn't force, it invites. And the more you walk toward it, the more paths seem to open up. This doesn't mean absence of challenge. It means that even with fear, you feel that something bigger sustains you, and that something isn't external. It's your own center, that part that saw your potential even before you had the courage to look at it. Self-sabotage at this point begins to lose its power, not because it was defeated, but because it ceased to make sense. You no longer need to hide, nor protect yourself from a past that has been embraced. When you live aligned with this self, life begins to taste real. Purpose stops being a vague concept and becomes direction. And that's where everything begins, when you stop running away from who you are and start finally walking toward who you were born to be. Did you notice? Self-sabotage isn't your defect. It's an ancient language trying to protect you from the new. Now that you understand how these patterns form and how your unconscious pulls you back to the familiar, the question remains. Will you continue operating on autopilot? Or will you start listening to the part of you that wants to grow? Because deep down, something inside is already calling you. And if you've made it this far, it's because you're ready. But now it's up to you. Which part of your life do you feel sabotages you the most today? Is it at work, in relationships, in the choices you avoid? Tell us in the comments, because understanding this is already a huge step toward changing everything. And if this video helped you in any way, share it with someone who also needs to break this cycle. One person's transformation begins with another's insight. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to continue this journey with us. Here, We don't just talk about change, we talk about awakening. And if you want to go even deeper, watch the video that's on screen now. It will show you why it's not you who chooses your destiny. It's your unconscious until you learn to command it.